The Council regularly incorporates stakeholder presentations into meetings such as the one today. This is consistent with our goal to ensure a strong open line of communication with external stakeholders, especially through the work of our stakeholders committee. The objective of these presentations is to inform the Council's review of DCR stakeholder relations and to gather ideas on best practices that can inform DCR's work. The Council recently established a new process for receiving and evaluating stakeholder presentation requests. As part of this process, requests are received through the Council's website. They're then evaluated by the Stakeholders Committee based on certain criteria, which makes recommendations to the chair. The objective of this process is to provide greater transparency to the selection process and to ensure that we hear from a broad range of groups. Today's presentation is from the Esplanade Association, represented by Executive Director Michael Nichols. This presentation is a follow-up to the EA's previous presentation before the Council in January 2020 regarding its vision for the former Lee Pool site. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. We look forward to hearing more about your plans.
Thank you, Chairman Walton, councilors, commissioner, and other DCR staff, and everyone here. Thank you for making some time today. I will look to put up a PowerPoint deck to talk over for this presentation. Would perhaps Nate, you're off mute. Would you be able to tell me if you guys can see that okay? You can. Okay, good. Well, again, thank you. My name is Michael Nichols. I'm the Executive Director of the Esplanade Association. We're delighted to talk to you today about our plans for the Charlesbank Landing site on the Esplanade. But very briefly about us, as I believe many on the council know, we are a 20-year-old public charity, privately funded nonprofit organization that works with, in partnership with DCR to sustain and improve the Charles River Esplanade, the historic span and Boston landmark, 64 acres, 3.5 miles, all on the Boston side of the river between the Bee Bridge and the Museum of Science. Over the course of our 20-year partnership with DCR, we've raised over $21 million to invest in capital refurbishment, capital improvement, new playgrounds, art murals, signage for the park, fixing up historic structures, planting new trees, also a wide spectrum of programmatic efforts. 70 or 80% perhaps of the events and activities that happen on the Esplanade each year are either hosted or produced by the Esplanade Association, from concerts to fitness classes, children's activities, 5Ks and the like. We also run historic tours, plant tours, garden tours, and increasingly now our public art tours. We're talking today about the Lee Pool site. This is a pool that had been in operation since the 1950s, but was closed in the 1990s to public access. It remained, closed off to the public for the better part of about 25 years. You see an aerial here from a few years ago of the old pool, which we'll see another vantage point on this in a few minutes, but just to orient you, it's just adjacent to Massachusetts Eye and Ear. You see the one of the fields of the Teddy Ebersol's Red Sox Fields complex at Letterman Park, located just to the left side of the photo, and just a little piece of the Charles River on the other side of the parking lot there. The Esplanade Association has been working with DCR and talking about improvements to this site for at least a decade and probably more. This was a proposal that came out of our Esplanade 2020 plan 9 years ago for the Charlesbank River Center. This was a visioning effort that was done at that time with DCR and the public to think about a number of different areas of the Esplanade and how we could improve the public's access, enjoyability of the park, connection to and from nature, the river, and one another. And you see here, as long ago as about 10 years ago, there was a proposal for a public facility in this specific location. In 2017, State Rep Livingstone worked with DCR to commission a public process to conceive of an improved use to that long dormant site on the Esplanade. We were appreciative that DCR took a number of steps at that time to move this project forward, including hiring an architect and a landscape architect, and considering the future of this site. I know this font's a little small, but this is the current project page on the DCR website that talks about this project as a plan to make the Lee Pool a multi-purpose pavilion. It then runs through a number of project goals that the agency asks stakeholders and the public to consider, engaging the community and partner groups in the planning and programming, creating an indoor year-round event venue, including food service, area for DCR programs and partnership activities, providing critical amenities for the park, such as bathrooms and water fountains, supporting DCR's Esplanade maintenance and storage needs, increasing access to the waterfront, broadening opportunities for outdoor recreation, reclaiming parkland, and reconnecting the Lee Pool area to the broader Esplanade landscape. I'd say today, as then, we believe in each one of those goals to be worthy goals for the Esplanade. There was a wide spectrum of partner groups that were involved in this effort, from environmental groups to Esplanade stakeholders to neighbors, both residential and institutional, to just representatives of the public who are continually interested in the state's most visited state park and how it evolves. There were a number of meetings and activities that occurred in 2017, both with the smaller stakeholder group and then with the public more broadly. Design charrettes, consensus goal sharing, design options, including an adapted reuse option was considered. Ultimately, the consensus item reflected the views of over 250 public comments, both organizational, institutional, and individual members of the public. What emerged from that process was what I would say is quite large format building. It was the largest of the presented options, 45,000 square feet, 3 indoor basketball courts that could be repurposed into a multi-purpose space for events, activities, other sports and activities. This was, again, a consensus item that emerged. It was a beautiful building, but quite large, as you see in the rendering on the bottom, with a green roof, and with an opportunity to try and blend in with the surrounding Esplanade, even at its 45,000 square foot size. The Department of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance of the state then reviewed this proposal and put an estimated price tag of about $50 million to construct the building. The Esplanade Association, working with our partner at Hill House, then costed out the annual operations load for this building and received an estimate from a consultant that it would take nearly $1 million, $850,000 to operate this structure going forward. Our partners at DCR at the time and since have provided clarity and did really provide clarity through that public process that the agency did not have the resources, capital or operating, to put towards this project. They could not fund construction, and if they could, I believe it was stated that they would not, that they have such a statewide responsibility that a $50 million investment in the Esplanade in this way would really put a hamper on their ability to support other park spaces around the rest of the state. We certainly understood that and believed that there was transparency around that the state would not fund construction, operation, or maintenance of this project, and that the agency would be looking to the private sector to bear the cost through a public-private partnership. DCR noted at the time that this arrangement would likely have the Commonwealth retain ownership over any improvements made on the site. That's in keeping with the partnership we have with DCR today when we fund a playground improvement, new or an upgrade. All of those improvements become the property of the Commonwealth, so we're familiar with that model. DCR offered that the partner would be able to lease the site to operate and maintain the building, within for DCR and on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth. DCR also noted that the successful operator could retain revenue generated by the building, especially to put back into the costs of that building. But that, the operator could only obtain a 10-year operating lease from DCR unless there was legislative authorization for a longer lease term. Finally, in 2019, we saw some real action on site. The DCR sought to capitalize on funding that was available at that time to remove the old pool, its locker room building, the bleacher seating that was on site, and to remediate the site to clear the path for its future use. Around that same time, DCR provided EA a formal 3-year lease for our in-park operations. The Esplanade Association, I kind of moved through this quickly earlier, but we maintain a field presence in partnership with DCR, where we have a 3-person crew that works 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year in the park, planting trees, cleaning the park, tending to the gardens, lawns and trees, removing trash, coordinating volunteer activities. We also maintain programmatic storage on the park for the, like I said, 60, 70, 80 events and activities a year that we help support within the park. All of those uses have a modest space that I'll be able to show in a moment that operate under a 3-year lease that really formalized the roughly 10-year long partnership that the commissioner detailed that was at the site of the former Lee Pool. Since the demolition of this structure, DCR moved into its own operations for the Charles River Reservation parks, a new facility at the North Point Park in Cambridge. DCR then completed remediation of the Lee Pool. However, the resulting lawn area has some grade and drainage challenges that I think perhaps render the current space not the highest best use of public land, though certainly I think an improvement over the Lee Pool that was there before. As you can see, of course, we've had a heavy rain year, and so this is the status of the site today. Not today, these were photos from August, but that it is a site that remains a challenge for the public and for the Esplanade Association as stewards with DCR of this space, that in higher rain events and in wetter conditions, the lawn puddles water and really does not function as a terrific open space area of what I think the Esplanade deserves for the public that might use this area. So, we continue to be engaged with DCR and our elected officials on a path forward. We've had hundreds of stakeholder conversations over the last several years. We believe that there's now an improved approach that continues all of the goals that emerged out of the 2017 public process, but potentially adds even smarter, more modern considerations of equity and climate change to make the proposal from 2017 even stronger. In 2019, DCR leadership embraced this rescaling of the project, while still wanting to review some of the specific project elements. For example, the DCR commissioner at the time requested changes to the building design that we've since accommodated, and also noted that the DCR would not need space within the facility, given the recent opening of the North Point facility, which was built for a many decades long needs of the agency. DCR at that time requested EA design a sign that would announce the project and signaled their support for the Esplanade Association pursuing legislation for a longer lease term to provide donors to the project the security of knowing that the project would have a lasting impact in the park. Since that time, we retained DCR's pavilion architect and landscape architect, Marianne Thompson and Michael Van Valkenburg, to refine the plan. And as I mentioned, it lowered the cost significantly from $50 million to $14 million, reduced the size of the building by creating much more public open space. One of the things we've heard is try to make the project feel more public, look more public, function as some of the very best public spaces we have in the Commonwealth. And we believe we've been able to do that by downscaling the size of the building. We've also been able, however, to add new public amenities that weren't even requested by the public process in 2017. The most significant of which is a visitor center to basically center this corner of the park, for the entire area of the city that it occupies. It's near the Museum of Science, it's near the Green Line, the West End community, but it's also the gateway to the entire Esplanade and the entire Charles River Reservation from the east heading west. And I'll get to some of the climate change improvements in a moment. So this is an aerial of what the site looked like just a few years ago, another vantage point of what I shared before. You see the existing Alphonse spray deck to the lower right, the Ebersol Fields in the upper left, and the Charles River to the right. You see the decommissioned pool and the vehicles you see in the center of the image were mostly DCR and Esplanade Association vehicles. As we were sharing the space, there was also Hill House and Charles River Conservancy uses that were in the back of house of the decommissioned pool. What you would see today in perhaps drier conditions is this site. So the Ebersol Fields, of course, in the upper part of the image, but this lawn area is what results from the remediation a few years ago. And what we've proposed and worked with, again, so many stakeholders and the architect and landscape architect, is a modest scale pavilion building, only about 10,000 square feet, about 2/10 of an acre in size of the overall 2-acre site. So just about 10% of the overall site would be dedicated to this indoor facility. Then a youth regulation size athletic field, event lawns, a nature play area with a dynamic monitored water management feature that would serve to try and manage runoff on the site within the site, instead of putting it, risking it going into the river or putting it back into the city's sewer system. Pollinator gardens, new groves of trees, and much more that I can detail on later slides. So this sort of encapsulates really the very public facing amenities that are on site. An 1.5 acres of landscape improvements, including those event lawns and nature play areas that I mentioned before. It also includes an open air park maintenance and operation space. As I mentioned, the Esplanade Association has has had, for over 10 years with DCR, open air spaces in the park where we have mulch piles or get plant deliveries. Right now, if you go to our facility in the park, you'll see 4 or 5 new trees popping out of the top of our facility that will be planted in the park this fall. And additionally, there'll be a dynamic, LEED certified, environmentally responsible year-round visitor center and pavilion facility that would include interpretive services space for the public, a cafe, year-round public bathrooms, meeting rooms, as well as park support office spaces for nonprofit usage. What's around the corner? This is actually sort of hot off the press and not something that we've much shared with the public yet, but I want to show that we're continuing to try and refine these plans, even as we've announced them to the public and requested the scrutiny of the legislature, of the council, of the public. We're hoping to add a solar roof to the upper roof of the pavilion, along with green living roof to any sort of non-occupiable roof that doesn't allow for solar or for roof deck use from the public. And so we continue to try and refine these plans. The Esplanade Association has joined a cohort of the Boston Green Ribbon Commission of their arts and culture sector to try to figure out how you can either retrofit museums and historic buildings, or in our case, get ahead of it and actually build something new that is mindful of climate change and sets an important path and example forward for the future. We're also a member of the Coalition for a Resilient and Inclusive Waterfront. And so part of our plans include rebuilding the riparian edge of the Charles River in this area, possibly creating a new river access point. Each of the river access points on the Esplanade are incredibly popular, and we believe that a new one in this area will even heighten public interest in the overall site. So in summary, the project has a number of public benefits that are realized through what is really an innovative public-private partnership for DCR and for Massachusetts on state parkland. We're working on visitor experience. We're working on environmental and climate change preparedness, equity and access I'll talk about in a moment. It really heightens the ability to make strides on the operational experience on the Esplanade, to have facilities that are purpose-built, not just for the broader reservation, but for specifically the state's busiest state park in the Esplanade itself. Children's and family programming would heighten, year-round programming would heighten in a facility like this, along with contributing to an improvement in the recreational and open space available on the Esplanade. To date, the project and its accompanying proposed legislation have been scrutinized by 23 nonprofit organizations who've opted to sign on to the legislation, along with the park's full legislative delegation, the 2 state senators, the state representative, our city councilor, along with the Boston Globe editorial board, and over 400 public comments as of today from 70 different zip codes in Massachusetts, which actually represents about 15% of the zip codes in Massachusetts. Folks have, in just the last 3 weeks, signed letters of support to EEA and DCR, indicating their support for this project. And I think the reason that the interest is so widespread is not just that the Esplanade is so important to the fabric of Massachusetts, the home of the 4th of July, and so many other civic activities, but because this project, we believe, creates an important example of a public-private partnership that could be replicated around the state, that allows the state to stretch its resources farther and wider and create more resources in communities where perhaps there isn't the same level of private interest in funding what are overtly public benefits for the public. So as I mentioned, we believe this is really a model PPP. We have agreed, the Esplanade Association, to work with DCR and DCAM to fund, without taxpayer dollars, design, permitting, construction, the annual operations and programming responsibility of the site, including staffing for up to 40 years, and the building and site maintenance for up to 40 years. That would, we believe, signify the largest private gift in the history of the state park system in dollar terms. We estimate it's at least over $20 million. It is built on being able to rely on revenue that's created on site to be put back into those annual operations, which is, we think, a really important consideration and a reasonable one on a site that has not created revenue in at least, I think 40 years, if not probably ever. We've also agreed to a number of important considerations in the pending legislation before the legislature. That EA would gift all improvements to the Commonwealth. We would restrict revenue to being used on the site or within the overall park at the approval of DCR. That there would be strict reporting and transparency considerations. scrutiny from the Inspector General's office and the legislature, not just up front, but in an ongoing way. That we would, and I see Phil Saunders here today, and so we're happy certainly to undergo a no net loss analysis at the beginning of the project to ensure that there's no net loss of public lands as a consideration of this project. We've committed to language that would revert the site to DCR's operational responsibility if at any point in the future it's considered that the project or our operation of the site does not create outcomes that are in support of public access. And so whatever thresholds are created for this ongoing conversation, we would commit to those, and that DCR, it would be, at the end of the day, the DCR is in control of this park and should always be. And we believe there's language that is quite strong in support of DCR's control of the site. And then we've also agreed to collaborate on a formal role for DCR on the site, including, just as one example, we believe that a DCR park ranger would be the right first initial point of contact on site within the visitor center, someone to help you access information about the park and what's going on in the park. And we'd certainly be happy to commit to something like that. I'll wrap up with just a couple of slides on, there have been expressed concerns over time from state officials that we've worked with. And I think, the benefit of a project that's been talked about for 10 years is we think it constantly gets better. And we really think that its time is now. The look and feel of a public building and public site that is an important consideration. Hearing that there was concerns in this area, we reduced the building size, we redesigned the entry to the commissioner's specifications, amplified open space and recreational amenities, and added a visitor center. With concerns about revenue retention, we restricted the revenue to site or park uses that have to be approved by DCR. We've added both executive branch and legislative branch reporting requirements that would be annual going forward. We've added transparency requirements on how the revenues, expenses, and programming allocations are made that would also be annual going forward. A programming approach that's modeled after the leading local and national examples of programming models, both statewide and nationwide. And we've developed a sample programming calendar that emphasizes equity and access. We've sought community support for this model. And so the 23 nonprofit organizations, environmental groups, recreational groups, stakeholders of the Esplanade, neighbors, residential, neighbors, institutional, have all reviewed this programming approach and believe it to be the right one for the site, and have supported that approach that is quite transparently in the state legislation. There's been concerns that EA would have our operational facilities in the park, despite that, of course, we've had them there for 10 years and that they've been approved. They were approved through the 2017 public process and through all of those 23 nonprofits that have reviewed this project. But nonetheless, as I've mentioned, we've committed to both the IG review and the no net loss appraisal to determine any value for the Esplanade Association facilities. We believe that value is to the public, frankly. We believe that our entire existence and our mission as a public charity is in support of the Esplanade Association. But nonetheless, an appraisal will bear out whether there's any private value to the facilities EA would occupy within the site. And we have to outweigh those private values with the public improvements that are being made on site. And we believe that public value will well outweigh any considered private value that's on the site. We've continued to seek approval from the public process, as I've mentioned, and we've designed our operational facilities to augment the public experience with green walls and mural walls and the like. And finally, the operations and programming model, there's been a concern that it's been too focused on abutters. And I'll just say, frankly, we know at the Esplanade Association that many of our direct abutters are some of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Boston and in the state, in Beacon Hill and Back Bay. We have created programming partnerships for years and hiring models for our staff and board service models for our board that are focused on equity. We were early to this conversation. We're proud of the track record that we have. And we're proud of the partners that have come to the table on not just what we do each year, but on this project specifically. And we believe that we have a model that is supportive of equitable outcomes on the site. We view as a hallmark of our equity and environmental justice work that this project and the work that we do within the park, makes a park that is welcoming to all. That while we always believe DCR should be a foundational funder of the day-to-day on the site, that the improvements that EA has made, the $21 million in support we've provided over the last 20 years, has allowed DCR to stretch their budget farther and wider throughout Boston and throughout the Commonwealth in ways that we think are a really important example to set for a partner in Massachusetts. We've sought to partner with groups led by creatives of color. There's a list here of many of our most frequent partners on the Esplanade. And these groups are seeking more accessible and flexible programming venues on the Esplanade. One example is Catherine Morris, the executive director and founder of BAMS Fest, who appeared on WBZ TV a few weeks ago regarding the Charlesbank Landing project and said, for this space to exist means we have a moment, particularly in the city of Boston, to do some amazing, radical, imaginative things that are creative. And she believes that it really gives credit to the Esplanade Association for making the Hatchell available to musical artists and producers of color. And they believe that a similar tact would be had at the Charlesbank Landing facility, were we to be able to have the operational and programming role that we've sketched out in the pending legislation. I'll just end with, a couple of weeks ago, we were particularly appreciative for the Boston Globe editorial board taking a deep dive on the project and coming out with the statement that this is just a portion of, and I'd be happy to drop into the chat, the full link that says this legislation will make this particular partnership possible, and it's carefully crafted to ensure that public access and to safeguard the rights of taxpayers. The property under lease would be offered rent-free. The Esplanade Association then would be obligated to spend at least $10 million on planning, design, construction, refurbishment, repair, improvements to the site, and agree to other public benefits to assure there's no net loss to the state. For 2 decades, the Esplanade Association has proved itself a worthy and generous partner and good steward of one of the gems of visionary landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace. Charlesbank Landing is in keeping with that tradition, and state lawmakers should help make it happen. And I really do hope today that, and I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have, but I do really hope today that the council can help us realize this vision. Next year is the 200th anniversary of Olmsted's birthday. The very first part of the Esplanade that was ever created was Charlesbank. The Charlesbank area of the Esplanade returns this name to its historical roots. And it would be a fitting tribute to Olmsted on the 200th anniversary of his birthday that the Charlesbank Landing project is moving forward with the number of public benefits that it offers. And I'll take down the presentation to hear if there are any questions, but I appreciate the time of the council today.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for your comprehensive presentation. Questions, comments from the council? Jack? You're muted, Jack.
Technical issues today. I'm sorry. The question I have is, I think this potentially has a huge benefit to DCR, particularly as a way of attracting additional private funding to the parks. I think there's a real benefit to that. I think clearly the state has an obligation where the park system is underfunded to kick in the tax dollars. But if we could build a model that would bring in other private parties to help fund the parks, I think it's great. What is puzzling to me here is where is the state DCR on this legislation and moving forward? I mean, I think it's something that the council should consider writing to support. But I just want to ask that question, I guess not necessarily the Esplanade Association, but whether Nick or the commissioner are still on the phone. Where is the state on this project? And if there's a problem, what is it?
I'll just note that during this presentation section, so questions can be directed at the presenter, but if there are follow-ups with DCR, we can request that they provide that information later. So, Michael, did you want to take the question?
Yeah, I mean, I won't answer for DCR other than to say, after 20 years of partnership with the agency, I know that they have, or we know that they have an important role to play in the protection of Article 97 space. I believe it is a good thing that the agency takes a close, hard look at any proposed different use of public parkland. We believe we've been transparent and answered the questions that have been asked, but it's good that we have such a restrictive process in Massachusetts, both by law and by policy of no net loss to review proposals like this. We're hopeful that we put the right answers on the table, and I would defer, kind of the rest of a question like that to the agency itself.
Nate, the one thing that I'll just add is, as Jim said, we're reviewing the proposal. There was legislation that was discussed. We provided direct and specific feedback to the legislation, and we're comparing what has been discussed here and announce publicly with the feedback that we provided and how it would impact our operations, not just here, where we do have a partnership that's long and deep and has, we've worked through all sorts of issues and ways to move forward that are beneficial to everyone, but how it would affect our operations and partnerships throughout the state as well. So hopefully, Jack, we can provide more feedback and something more fulsome for you in the future, but that's where we are right now, as Jim had identified, and that's really all we have for today.
Well, whatever the future is, but could we define the future in some constricted way? And, could we hear from DCR next month exactly where they are in this legislation and this project? So as the council can make some sort of decision about, is there a way forward? It just seems to me that this has gone on for a long time, and it just needs to sort of come to a head. And if DCR has real concerns about the legislation or the project, I think there's an obligation to put them forward. Otherwise, frankly, it looks like the agency is being non-responsive. And I think that particularly with a gift, and not so much the gift itself, but the potential for showing a significant private contribution to the state parks, I think we need to advance it. And I think DCR needs to be a little more nimble in how it responds. So I would make a formal request that next month you come in and explain to us exactly where you are and bring this thing to a head. And if there's a problem, and I for one believe, Article 97 protections are really important, but I also don't think they should be used as a hedge against other things. So I think we need to bring that to a head. If you have real concerns about these things, bring them forward and have a public process. It looks like a lot of people have reviewed it and support it, but I think it's up to DCR to just come forward with a clear set of responses.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot, but that's how I feel.
Thanks, Jack. We'll note that request, and perhaps we can specify that more clearly, what exactly we're looking for the agency in writing after the meeting. Are there any questions from the councilors about the project itself? Jennifer?
Yeah, just to follow up on that point, we, the Stewardship Council, have a legislatively stated specific role with respect to Chapter 97 changes. So Article 97 changes. So, we have an interest in following this closely and being informed when and if that comes to our meeting. And I wonder if we might get a copy of the DCR's comments on the legislation. And I just want to say thank you for that presentation. Really interesting, really thorough, very inspiring. And in particular, I'm really drawn to your comments about being a role model to other projects, and also to the idea that friends groups would look at their park not in isolation, but as how an ad in one spot can free up resources in another location, which is just another great example of why it's so fantastic when friends groups collaborate and inform one another of what's going on, because even though they're individual groups, we all sort of hang together and we're one statewide resource, and what happens at one has a ripple effect at another. So thank you for that great presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer. Other questions or comments from Michael? Okay, I don't think I see anything else. Michael, thanks again for taking the time and for putting together such a detailed and comprehensive presentation. We appreciate it.